Welcome everyone to the Dragonflight Retribution Paladin Guide. My name is Gorelock, and I have mained Retribution Paladin for over a decade, since Wrath of the Lich King. I am a world-class Retribution Paladin, achieving feats across all three endgame pillars, such as Top 10 World Mythic Plus, peaking at rank 1, Horde Hall of Fame, as well as Top 20 World Mythic Parsing, and Hero of the Horde in PvP, amongst many other feats. This guide will be covering everything you need to know going into Dragonflight, which is releasing November 28th, 29th, and going into the expansion's first raid, Vault of the Incarnates. The Retribution Paladin, like most melee specs, are looking stronger than their ranged counterparts for the first time in a while. Shocker, right? I know. Let's get right to it, since there have been so many changes that have been good, bad, and unfortunately, some really bad. If Shadowlands was the unpruning, then Dragonflight is the re-pruning. Going from Shadowlands to Dragonflight, the Retribution Paladin baseline has been absolutely gutted. This is largely due to World of Warcraft's new talent overhaul. The following are the only baseline combat skills now: Crusader Strike, with only one charge; Shield of the Righteous, which you will probably never use as a ret; Judgment, Flash of Light, Hammer of Justice, Consecration, Word of Glory, Hand of Reckoning, the taunt, Divine Shield, Redemption, our resurrection, and our brand new B-Res, Intercession. Yes, you heard that right, Paladin now has a B-Res, which is fantastic. While Shadowlands added 11 new abilities to all the already existing, in Dragonflight, 11 is now consequently your baseline. Everything else is now learned through the Paladin tree and the Spec tree. Now, with the baseline out of the way, let's take a deep and honest dive into what a Retribution Paladin in Dragonflight will look like. Upon activating the Retribution talent tree, you will automatically learn Templar's Verdict, Hammer of Wrath, as well as Crusader and Retribution auras. Let's start with the tree on the left side, the Paladin tree. The very first thing I want you to note is the 8 with the lock next to it. This means that you must learn 8 skills on the tree in this top area before you can access the next area, in addition to needing to learn all levels of at least one skill one node higher on the tree. Generally speaking, skills towards the bottom of the tree should be more powerful. However, there will always be exceptions to that. Now let's take a look at this tree. So on this Paladin tree, you get 31 points available to you when you are level 70. Let's take a look at what is absolutely needed. So the very first point that I'm going to spend is going to be on Lay on Hands. Lay on Hands is the best off heal in the entire game. It's essentially a must for your class. After that, I'm going to focus on getting as much throughput on this tree as possible. So, unfortunately, there's no throughput yet on this tree, so we're going to have to take some nodes that, although they're helpful, they are not direct throughput. So let's take the best ones first. First, we're going to take Divine Steed, which is our only, and I repeat, only movement ability. And then we're also going to take Cavalier to give our Divine Steed 2 charges. And then over here on this tree, this is our first instance of a choice. We're going to take Seasoned Warhorse, which gives our Divine Steed 1 extra second in duration. So instead of a 3-second, it'll be a 4-second. The other option here is Seal of the Templar. It's just not good. It just gives a bit of extra range while you're on your horse. I'd much rather more mobility, so that way I could have more uptime on damage. After that, we're going to take 2 ranks of Fist of Justice, because both ranks are required to take the skill right after it, Greater Judgment, which causes creatures affected by our judgment to take an additional 20% damage from our next holy power ability, which is very strong. So with all of that done, we now need one more skill amongst this top area. However, you might see a problem. All 4 of the skills that we haven't taken yet are our utility that we had in Shadowlands. And you'll see this later down the tree, but we're not going to have any bonus points to spend or to come back to these, really. So that means out of the 4 pieces of utility we had in Shadowlands, we only get 1, which honestly is really not good. And that's probably the worst thing you're going to hear about Ret in this entire guide. So your choices are between Blessing of Freedom, which is our immunity, movement immunity spell that allows us to, stay our slow speed and not any slower. We have the auras, which are the other 2, which is Devotion Aura, which is the reducing 3%, which is very useful for a raid if you don't have, say, a Holy Paladin to do it, as well as Concentration Aura, which is slightly less useful. And then you have Blinding Light and Repentance. Of these 2, I tend to take Blinding Light more since it's an AoE interrupt, which can be very useful in M+. And then over here you have Cleanse Toxins, which removes poison and disease effects. But actually you can't even take that one because you need at least 1 point in either Blinding Light or Repentance to take it. For the purpose of M+, since that's what I do a lot, I'm going to actually take Blinding Light. And now you can see, since we have spent 8 points, that has unlocked the next section of our tree. And now we need to spend 12 points to unlock the last section. So I'm going to continue with all of our most important skills, focusing on damage. The very first one you'll see over here is Avenging Wrath. That is our major 2-minute cooldown. It's pretty obvious that we're going to have to take that. Next is Rebuke, which is our kick. We're definitely going to have to take that. And then over here, increases armor by 2% and critical strike by 2%. And there's 2 points, so that's 4% armor and 4% crit. We are definitely going to take that. Next up, you can see over here, Seal of Reprisal. Your Crusader Strike deals 5% more damage, going up to 10%. So that's obviously a throughput, so we're going to take that for sure. Next up, we have Blessing of Protection. Definitely going to take a point in that. Over here, we have Incandescent versus Touch of Light. Between these 2, based on sims, Incandescent seems to be a bit better, so we're going to go with that one, as well as it is technically AoE. Tends to do about like 1 or 2% of your overall damage. It really depends on procs. Next up, we're going to take Unbreakable Spirit. This reduces the cooldown of your Divine Shield, Shield of Vengeance, and Lay on Hands by 30%. That's why you saw up here it was 7 minutes instead of 10-minute cooldown on Lay on Hands. So we got 3 more points that we have to use. These 3 points, where you're going to have to take Blessing of Sacrifice, because that's a really big cooldown for both Raid and M+. We're going to get some throughput on healing, which is going to be Golden Path. It just gives your Consecration a bit of AoE healing. It helps the raid or party a bit. It's not a lot, but it helps a little bit, and it's better than the other options, to be honest. Lastly, we have 1 more point that we have to use before we get into the really good stuff, and we're going to have to go with our throughput, which is Recompense. This essentially gives a big hit of about 30% of your max health bonus damage to your next judgment after that effect ends. So say you helped prevent 50,000 damage maxed out. So like say you have 250k health, you manage to prevent 50,000 damage to the person you used it on. It'll throw that 50,000 damage onto your next hammer. And what you're going to see in the Retribution tree is there's a lot of ways to buff up the damage of your Judgment, which makes Judgment a very interesting potential build path. So that is a DPS increase, so we're going to go with that. The other option here reduces the cooldown of Blessing of Sacrifice by 60 seconds. Now, let's get into the good part. So we only have 11 skill points to use for this final section. So we're going to put 2 points into Aspiration of Divinity. This lets our Crusader Strike now grant 2% increased strength for 6 seconds, and multiple applications can overlap. This is obviously throughput. Over here, you got Holy Avenger and Divine Purpose. We're definitely going to take Divine Purpose. Over here, we have Hallowed Ground. It makes Consecrations damage do 10% more. This is actually a good ability, skill, and that's because Consecration, unlike in Shadowlands, actually does a lot of damage, and I'll get into that later. So we now have 7 points left. These last 7 points are always going to go to the same place, as at least until something changes. So the first one's going to be of Dusk and Dawn, and the Seal of Order, which works in tandem with Dusk and Dawn. What this does essentially is our damage and healing is going to be increased by 10% with Blessing of Dawn, which is a 15-second buff, and it's very easy to keep a 90 to 100% uptime on this ability. And then Seal of Order, on top of that, makes our Holy Power spenders also deal another 10% as well. When we are in the Dusk, we're going to take 4% less damage, have 10% more armor, and our Holy Power generators are going to cool down 10% faster. Again, you can have very high uptime on this, so both of these are going to be a must. With these last 5 points, we're going to take 2 points in Seal of Might, which gives an additional 8% mastery during Avenging Wrath, and then 2 points in Seal of Alterous Alacrity, which is going to give another 4% baseline haste. And then finally, we're going to put 1 point into Sanctified Wrath. Sanctified Wrath, for those that played in BFA, this is essentially Light's Decree. So this is a very strong, uncapped AoE ability. So that is all of our points in the Paladin tree. So let's take a look at what we are missing out on that we just simply don't have any points to allow. So we're missing out on Blessing of Freedom, we're missing out on Devo Aura, and we're missing out on Cleanse Toxins. It's worth noting that in Raid you will probably have a Holy Paladin and they'll be able to take Devotion Aura. The reason for this is Retribution Aura is actually a throughput ability now, which is really sad. Essentially, anytime anyone in a party or raid takes more than 50% of their health and damage, you get Seraphim for 4 seconds. This can't occur more than every 30 seconds, but this is still a throughput increase. For that reason, you're going to want to take Retribution Aura anytime you can. Obviously, you won't always be able to, but ideally you will be able to. Additionally, you are not learning Turn Evil. This ability, frankly, really just doesn't do anything, so we're skipping out on that completely. An ability that would be nice, similar to our other utility, is Judgment of Light. It's not a big heal, again, but it is extra padding out healing that can help in an M+ or a raid scenario that can keep everyone topped, especially since Judgment is such an important ability and you're using it so often. But again, it's not needed. Actually, all 3 of these abilities are throughput increasers, so Seal of Mercy helps Golden Path be a little bit more effective. After Image makes Word of Glory a bit more effective, and Seal of Clarity, again, makes Word of Glory a bit more effective. None of these are needed. Now, ones that I sort of wish we could have, but we just don't have the skill points for. Improved Blessing of Protection reduces it by 60 seconds, so it goes from 5-minute to 4-minute cooldown. Would be a nice to have, but it just is not necessary. This one, Obduracy, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, gives you 2% speed and 2% avoidance. Avoidance reduces AoE damage, so that's very nice, and 2% speed would just make you faster. Now, Seal of the Crusader is interesting. It is a throughput increase. It's up maybe about 50% of the time. Again, this is going to be one that you're going to hope that a Holy Paladin is in the raid and that they're going to take for you. But because this is actually a debuff that goes on the target. So that means not just you, but anyone who deals holy damage will benefit from this, and it goes up to 6% at rank 2. The very last skill over here is the one that has been changed probably the most on the beta, and is the most interesting. Currently not going to take it in any build, most likely, possibly in some like very niche single target builds, but it's one I'm going to keep my eye on because it's interesting. So Zealot's Paragon makes Hammer of Wrath and Judgment. I'm going to emphasize the Judgment part on this. Hammer of Wrath dealing 10% more damage is nice, but Judgment dealing an additional 10% more damage is going to be very interesting based on what you're going to see on the spec tree over in the right. Additionally, it also extends the duration of Avenging Wrath by 0.5 seconds whenever you use Hammer of Wrath or Judgment. Right now, you're able to extend your wings by up to maybe about 5 to 7 seconds based on a bunch of different procs and stuff, but it's just not enough time that it's good. Currently, the other endgame options here beat it out. So let's take a look at the Retribution tree now. So the Retribution tree, the very first thing you have to learn is Blade of Justice, so you will get your Blade of Justice. However, it only gives one holy power. Again, this tooltip is showing you when you have all the skills, because unfortunately you actually have to use all talent points. You're not allowed to leave anything untalented. So I will get back to that in a sec. The next thing you're going to learn is Art of War and Divine Storm. These are both absolute musts for obvious reasons. Art of War, the baseline in Dragonflight is 12%. Divine Storm, I'll get into the scaling on everything later, but it is your basic AoE spender. Next thing that we're going to learn is Improved Crusader Strike. Crusader Strike will now have 2 charges, just like it has always had. It's just you now have to spend a talent point for that. You're going to spend 1 talent point on increasing your mastery by 2%, and you're going to spend Holy Blade, which is what gives your Blade of Justice to give you 2 holy power instead of 1. On this row, you're going to take Imperium Power. Imperium Power, you're going to take this both in single target and AoE. It's just always good. Your first actual choice in Dragonflight, arguably, is going to be Shield of Vengeance versus Divine Protection. Currently, you're probably going to almost always take Shield of Vengeance because it does about the same thing as Divine Protection, except it also deals damage. So it is a throughput increase. A lot of the discussion with Ret is we're really hoping that we'd be able to take both of these, but as of right now, we are not able to. Next, we're going to take Blade of Wrath, which increases Art of War proc rate by 50%. Note that it's 50%, not 100%. That is one of the changes that I'll get into later. Next up, we're going to take Consecrated Blade. This is really interesting, and this is part of why Consecration is doing a bunch more damage aside from scaling changes. It's that every time you get an Art of War proc, the next Blade of Justice you do will also cast Consecration on the target, and this does not care about any other consecrations you already have out. So that means you can potentially have a bunch of consecrations all going at the same time, which obviously is very good. We're going to take Wake of Ashes, which is your big damage, generate 3 holy power. Since this is a hybrid build, we're going to take Sanctify. Again, this is why Consecration is doing a bunch more damage. Enemies hit by Divine Storm take 100% more damage from Consecration for 8 seconds. That's obviously a very big increase. Lastly, on this row, we're going to take one of High Lord's Judgment. So you could see you could have up to 2 ranks of High Lord's Judgment here. This increases Judgment damage by 8%. If you took 2, then it would be 16%. Next up, this row over here is probably one of the more interesting rows because there's actually a bunch of choice here. Let's start with the ones that you pretty much have to take. So over here you have Fires of Justice versus Zeal. You're going to take Zeal. It's currently much better. And then over here you have Truth's Wake. Truth's Wake is a conduit that we had in Shadowlands. This is pretty low on the scaling. It's not worth taking, even in AoE. Next up over here, you can either take Might, which is just going to add 20% crit to your wings to make it essentially what Shadowlands Wings was, or you could take Crusade. Right now, Crusade is just much better. It gives you 5 extra seconds on wings. You deal 30% more damage. You have 30% more haste. It's just better. So we're going to take Crusade, and you're always going to take that. Doesn't matter single target or AoE. Next up, this is probably one of the most interesting choices that you're going to have in Dragonflight currently. You can either take Ashes to Dust, which makes Art of War have a 35% chance. Instead of resetting Blade of Justice, you actually reset Wake of Ashes. Obviously, this proc is extremely powerful. But again, it is a proc. It's on the lower side to get. If you have an 18% chance, that means about 6 to 7% of your auto attacks will reset your Wake of Ashes. By the way, that does not mean you lose the free consecration on Blade. You just don't get a Blade reset. You'll have about 6 or 7 seconds, somewhere around there, to use Blade to get that consecration. You will almost always get it as long as you use it. Versus Radiant Decree. Radiant Decree is a little bit controversial. I personally don't like it, but it is very strong. It's very important to mention it is strong. So what it does is it replaces Wake of Ashes. Instead of getting bonus resets on Wake, this ability replaces Wake, so your ability that does a bunch of damage and gives you 3 Holy Power, it's now gone. You instead have a Holy Power Spender Radiant Decree. This does benefit from Spender debuffs, buffs, etc., and that's why it gets even stronger. And unlike Wake, that deals reduced damage after the first target, this does full damage to up to 5 targets, and then it does reduced damage. However, I believe the reduction is less than Wake. So Wake after the first target does half damage. I'm not sure on the exact scaling on Radiant, but I'm pretty sure it is higher than half. And the big thing you can see over here is that Radiant Decree is a 15-second cooldown. However, that 15-second is not affected by anything. Doesn't matter how much haste you have. There's no other abilities that affect it. It is just a 15-second cooldown. So for the purpose of this hybrid build, and again, a hybrid build in this case is going to be good for almost all content, I'm going to take Ashes to Dust. The next one, and this is probably the only meaningful choice that you really have in Dragonflight, and this is, you're just going to change this depending on the content you do, is Sanctification versus Inner Grace. So Inner Grace just is very simple, very straightforward. You can create a weak aura to track it. Every 12 seconds in combat, you gain 1 holy power, period. Sanctification is much more interesting. So Consecration periodically has a chance to grant you 1 holy power. The chance increases up to 4 targets. I believe we have some percentages on it. I think it's somewhere around like 3% scaling all the way up to 8%. I'd have to double check on those, but somewhere around there. And it counts all consecrations. So you have to remember, on a fight, you're probably going to have 2 consecrations on average going at the same time. So when you are doing AoE, Sanctification will generate more holy power than Inner Grace on AoE. However, in single target, Inner Grace will tend to outperform. The jury is still out on how many enemies you need exactly. Sanctification only scales up to 4. We believe it's somewhere around 2 to 3 is when Sanctification will start outperforming Inner Grace. Lastly, over here is Boundless Judgment. Boundless Judgment is interesting. Judgment has a 25% chance to chain to a nearby enemy. There's a very interesting Judgment build that I was sort of explaining before, where you can deal 16% more damage over here. You can have your Judgment start chaining. You could have another 10% Judgment bonus over here. And then obviously you'll have Divine Toll and Resonance, and we'll get to that in a sec. So for this option over here, I'm going to choose Sanctification. Sanctification is harder to play around because you don't know exactly when you're going to get the holy power, but in terms of throughput, in most scenarios, it will do more than Inner Grace. Next up, We're going to take Exorcism. Exorcism is currently pretty strong. If your enemy is in a consecration when you use it, the dot that does a bunch of damage is going to spread up to 7 nearby enemies as well. So it can be a bunch of damage. It's just a 20-second base cooldown, not affected by anything. Doesn't give any holy power, but it is a 30-yard range, so it could also be a good filler ability. We have 2 more. We're going to take Tempest to the Lightbringer. This is the legendary from Shadowlands. Essentially just makes your Divine Storm do 20% more damage. It projects out in front of you. It is uncapped AoE, so it just strikes all enemies for 20% of Divine Storm's damage. Very good throughput increase in AoE, and M+, or Raid, it tends to do about 5% of your overall damage in this one talent. Lastly, we're going to take Healing Hands. This reduces the cooldown on Lay on Hands even more, as well as makes Word of Glory's healing deal up to 100% more based on missing health. It's just great utility. If you use Lay on Hands on a very low health target, your Lay on Hands cooldown can be around 3 minutes or so. That means you could potentially use it 2 or 3 times in a raid fight, and just that more often in M+. Word of Glory just doing 100% more healing is very good for obvious reasons. It can tend to just, if you get a crit, it'll just heal you to full regardless of what HP you are at, pretty much. Alright, we got 10 more points. We're going to go through these a bit quickly. You're going to spend 2 on Ashes to Ashes. This gives you 4 seconds of Seraphim when you proc Art of War. This means proccing Art of War is very important, since there's tons of talents that benefit from it. You're going to put 2 points into Virtuous Command. This makes your Judgment make your auto attacks Crusader Strike, Blade of Justice do 10% additional holy damage, just more throughput. And then you're going to learn Final Reckoning, which is a uncapped AoE that does a burst of damage and then causes them to take 50% increased damage from your holy power abilities for 8 seconds. While off cooldown, it also passively does a good bit of damage, and then makes them take 10% increased damage from your next holy power ability spender when that proc happens. You now have 5 points left. 2 of these points you're probably going to want to spend into Divine Toll and Divine Resonance. Divine Toll hits up to 5 enemies with Judgment. Those Judgments will deal double the damage. Those Judgments will do a lot of damage. Do not underestimate them. And then you're going to take Divine Resonance. This is going to get you another 3 free Judgments, 1 at 5 second, 1 at 10 second, and 1 at 15 second after using Divine Toll. Now, these last 3 points is where you finally get some real choice in the spec tree. There are 3 places that you can realistically put it. Let's start with the one that you're probably going to use for most cases. So this is what I call the hybrid build. So a lot of these choices we've made are for AoE and increase your AoE throughput. For this last 3 points, we're going to put 2 into Templar's Verdict. This has a 15% chance to have your Templar's Verdict strike again for 20% of its damage. So that'll increase your overall damage of Templar's Verdict by about like 3% or so. And then you'll put the last point into Final Verdict, which just overall increases the damage of your main single target Holy Power Spender by about like 15% or so, somewhere in that area. And then also gives you a 10% chance to get a free Hammer of Wrath on a target of any health. So this will round out our hybrid tree. Now, other places you could potentially put these 3 points. There are 2 other places I've identified that are realistic. So going based on that Judgment build we were talking about, although I don't think it'll be the strongest right now, it's worth noting. You can take 1 point in Improved Judgment, which will reduce the cooldown of Judgment by 1 second. You can add another 8% damage to Judgment, and then you can take Boundless Judgment, which will make Judgment have a 25% chance to chain to a nearby enemy. So you could put the 3 points there. Or you can also put the 3 points over here. You can either take Consecrated Ground, which will give a bit of a slow debuff to enemies, make your consecration a bit larger. or you could take Hand of Hindrance. It really doesn't matter between the two. And then you put 2 points into Relentless Inquisitor. That essentially makes you have about 5% more haste. And you'll have a pretty high uptime on that, generally speaking. So that can be another interesting choice that you can take. It is worth noting that Righteous Verdict and also Execution Sentence will be returning as talent options. However, they are significantly weaker than they were in Shadowlands and therefore are not currently worth taking. Going from Shadowlands to Dragonflight, there are significantly fewer big scaling changes than BFA to Shadowlands. I'm going to skip most of the small and inconsequential ones to focus on the biggest changes. Divine Storm scaling is now about 86% of attack power as holy damage, down from 147%. Templar's Verdict is now about 126% of attack power as holy damage, down from 194%. These numbers are a significant scaling change from Shadowlands. However, the overall impact is minimal due to our class and spec talents, as well as the tier set making up most of the difference. There will be a noticeable difference in the damage spread between using a holy power spender and non-holy power spender without all your buffs up. But I repeat that this change is a relatively inconsequential one. The other biggest change is that Art of War now has a maximum proc rate of 18%, down from a maximum of 24% in Shadowlands. This is most likely due to how powerful Art of War proc is now in Dragonflight. With the lack of meaningful scaling changes and the complete overhaul to talents, build diversity for Ret will be very low. About 85 to 90% of all pieces of a given build will most likely be the same, with only about 4 to 5 talent points at a maximum per tree, and a few pieces of gear based on RNG being different between paladins that are playing optimally. Going from level 60 to 70, Blizzard pretty much just simply increased all stat scaling by about 5 times. After testing on beta, I have found that Mastery is greater than Haste, is greater than Crit, is greater than Versatility in terms of the number of points needed to get 1% of that substat. For Tertiaries, Speed is greater than Avoidance, which is greater than Leech. On screen, you can see the exact values for all sub and tertiary stats for the Retribution Paladin. With the new stat scaling and how Retribution Paladin works in mind, let's talk stat priority. With the release of Dragonflight, we will be in a patch 10.0. The significance of this for stat priority is it is a 0.0 patch, and the amount of substats you have will be the lowest for roughly the next 2 years. However, this amount is significantly higher relative to Shadowlands. With current predictions, you will have enough substats to get 2 stats to diminishing return caps of about 30% in Dragonflight. This is significantly higher than Shadowlands. Generally speaking, for Retribution Paladin to not feel terrible outside of major cooldowns, you want to get at least 18 to 20% haste. The following is your ideal stat priority. Until about 18 to 20% haste, haste is generally greater than Crit and Mastery, which is greater than Versatility. After achieving your ideal haste, your stat weights will change to Crit and Mastery is greater than Haste, which is greater than Versatility. With 80 to 90% of your damage being holy for single target and 90 to 95% plus for AoE, and the fact that the scaling for Mastery is almost double that for Versatility, Mastery will be better than Versatility until diminishing returns. Please note that these numbers are very preliminary and we're on beta, and may change as you get access to more gear. As always, this is just rough advice. Please, sim yourself. Your stat weights will change. By popular demand, Dragonflight will be bringing back the concept of tier sets. Ret's tier set is decent, but is completely uninspired. It is extremely basic. There will be 5 pieces that are part of the tier set. You will only need 4 of the 5 to gain the maximum benefits. The 2-tier set increases the damage of Judgment, Blade of Justice, and Wake of Ashes by 15%. The 4 set will increase Templar's Verdict and Divine Storm damage by 10%. That is all. Very simple and very straightforward. Having a full set will increase your overall damage by roughly about 8 to 9%, somewhere in that vicinity. There really isn't much to say about the damage rotation, as it is remaining mostly the same as it was during Shadowlands. The primary change is you will now use Consecration and Exorcism when you have a gap in your main rotation. Additionally, during times of sizable AoE, you will want to keep a 100% uptime on Consecration if possible. You will continue to be a Generator, Spender, melee DPS favoring Blade, Judgment, and Hammer over Crusader Strike. During Wings, you will want to keep Hammer on CD to maximize damage. Essentially, just like BFA and Shadowlands, Crusader Strike is the only ability on your main rotation that is considerably less important than all the others. In conclusion, Ret Paladin's current state in Dragonflight is in the upper 50% of damage. However, as the baseline balancing class, we will most likely end up closer to that 50% mark than a 100% mark. Their adaptable burst builds gives them the ability to shine damage-wise in most scenarios. The re-pruning has unfortunately taken 3 to 5 pieces of utility that most builds will never be able to use with the current trees. Our utility is still considered good, especially for raid progression. However, it is very niche, as we do not have a raid buff outside of Devo Aura, which you ideally do not want to run as Ret, because Retribution Aura is now a DPS increase. Although Devotion Aura is an absolute must, and is a guaranteed raid spot for at least one Paladin, that guarantee most of the time will go to a Holy Paladin. In terms of weaknesses, Ret only has 3, and they have been the same for the last 6 years. Mobility, damage outside of wings, and defensive options. However, with the addition of Exorcism and Consecration actually doing damage in conjunction with high substats, DPS button pressing downtime will actually be very low, and damage outside of wings is higher than ever before. Our mobility in Dragonflight will be even more awful than it was in Shadowlands, with only 2 charges of a 4-second Divine Steed with a 45-second cooldown. We have absolutely no other mobility options. Going into Dragonflight, many classes were given additional defensive options. Ret was essentially given nothing. We still lack meaningful defensive options outside of our powerful but very long CDs. Given the state of Ret, although okay, I cannot highly suggest playing one for fun or for progression if you are still deciding what to play in Dragonflight. Blizzard has left our spec sort of half complete. We as the Ret community are hoping that we will get the love we deserve, along with a few other specs in 10.1. And for that reason, I would suggest having a Ret alt ready should those changes ever come through, as they will make Ret a complete class. I hope you all enjoyed the guide, and I look forward to discussing the ongoing state of Dragonflight with everyone in the community. If you have not already, make sure to join my Discord server linked in the description, where I answer questions and post resources daily. I will be streaming tons of content over on my Twitch, twitch.tv/Gore_gaming, almost every day when Dragonflight releases. I have done my best to make this guide as in-depth and accurate as possible. Should any major changes happen, or if anything new is brought to my attention, I will have updates in the description below. As always, make sure to like and subscribe for more, as I have tons of videos on their way over the next few months. Comment below on what you guys would like to see next. Have a good one, and see you guys in the Dragon Isles. Gorelock. P.S. If you got to the very end of the video here, go to the comment section and type, "Ret mobility sucks." Have a good one.